Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. So I need to tell you something weird that happened while researching tonight's video. I was reading through this bank teller's testimony from Manitoba, right? And halfway through, she starts talking in third person, like she's describing herself from the outside. That's when I realized she figured out she wasn't real anymore. Look, I've covered a lot of horror stories on this channel. Cryptids, hauntings, unexplained deaths. But Canadian small towns? There's something different happening up there. And I'm not talking about Wendigos or skinwalkers, I'm talking about your actual neighbor. Here's the thing that freaked me out. In one town, families keep moving into the same house. Different people, every year. They all leave within 12 months. Nobody talks about why. But the neighbors never change. Same two families, living next door, for years. Watching, copying, learning. I've got 8 of these. A grocery worker, a teacher, a snowplow driver. Normal jobs, normal people, until they weren't. And honestly, the scariest one doesn't even have a monster. Subscribe if you're ready for this, because after tonight, you're gonna look at your neighbors differently. Let's start with the night shift in Saskatchewan. My name is Jennifer McLeod, and I've been carrying mail in Wawa, Ontario for 8 years. Wawa's a small town up north with about 3,000 people. Everyone knows everyone here. I started this job right after high school because I liked being outside and meeting people. Plus, Canada Post pays decent wages with good benefits. I know every street in this town like the back of my hand. Every dog that barks, every person who waves from their porch. I've delivered birthday cards to kids and pension checks to seniors. I've seen families move in and others pack up and leave. Being a mail carrier means you're part of people's daily lives, even if they don't always notice you. In 8 years, I thought I'd seen everything. Lost packages, angry customers, even the occasional weird letter. But what happened in December 2021 made me realize how wrong I was. Someone had been watching me for a very long time. Someone I delivered mail to every single day. Someone I trusted. What started as strange letters in my own mailbox turned into the worst 3 weeks of my life. By the end, 2 people were dead, and I learned that the sweet old lady who always offered me tea was actually planning to kill everyone I loved. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem the most harmless. Section 2. Professional context and setup. December in Wawa is brutal. Snow piles up higher than car windows, and the wind cuts through your jacket like a knife. But mail still needs to be delivered. Rain, snow, or shine, that's our motto. I drive a Canada Post truck, a little red and white van that's seen better days. The heater barely works, and the radio only picks up one station clearly. My route covers the east side of town, about 400 houses, 2 apartment buildings, and a few businesses. I start at 8 a.m. sharp, load my truck at the depot, and I'm usually done by 3 p.m. if nothing goes wrong. The supervisor, Dave, is pretty laid back as long as you get the job done and don't get complaints. I live alone in a small apartment above Murphy's Hardware on Main Street. 3rd floor, 2 bedrooms. Nothing fancy. The rent's cheap, and I can walk to work when my car breaks down. My neighbors are quiet, mostly seniors and young families. It's the kind of place where you feel safe leaving your door unlocked. December 15th, 2021. That's when it started. I remember the date because it was payday, and I was looking forward to Christmas shopping in Thunder Bay that weekend. The weather was especially nasty that day. Snow was coming down sideways, and the truck kept sliding on the icy roads. I was running about an hour behind schedule. I finished my route around 4 p.m. and headed home, cold and tired. I always check my own mailbox when I get home. Old habit from the job. Usually, it's just bills and flyers. But that day, there was a white envelope with my name written in careful handwriting. No return address, no stamp. Someone had put it there by hand. Inside was a single photo, black and white, taken from far away. It showed me delivering mail to the Henderson house on Pine Street. I was walking up their driveway, mailbag over my shoulder, looking down at their letters. The angle was weird, like someone was hiding behind the big oak tree in their yard. I figured it was just someone playing around, maybe one of the neighborhood kids with a camera. People take pictures of mail carriers sometimes. We're part of the community. I threw it in the trash and forgot about it. Section 3. First anomaly. 3 days later, another white envelope was waiting for me. Same handwriting, same paper. This time, my hands shook as I opened it. The photo showed me sleeping in my bed, in my own apartment, on the 3rd floor. I stared at the picture for a long time, trying to make sense of it. The angle was from my bedroom window, looking down at me lying under my blue comforter. My face was peaceful, completely unaware. The timestamp in the corner showed it was taken at 2:47 a.m. just 2 nights ago. My apartment building doesn't have a fire escape on that side. The window faces the alley behind Murphy's Hardware. To get that shot, someone would have had to climb up 3 stories, probably using the old telephone pole or the roof of the adjacent building. In winter. In the dark. Just to take a picture of me sleeping. I called the RCMP right away. Constable Morrison came over within an hour. He's a good guy, been working in Wawa for about 15 years. I showed him both photos and explained about my mail route and the Henderson house. Could be a prank, he said, but I could tell he was concerned. Or maybe someone has a crush and doesn't know how to express it properly. Either way, this is stalking behavior. We'll increase patrols around your building and the areas on your route. He took the photos as evidence and told me to call immediately if I received any more. I changed my bedroom curtains to thick, dark ones and pushed my dresser against the window. That night, I barely slept. The 3rd envelope arrived 4 days later. This one contained 3 pages of typed text. A detailed schedule of my daily routine. What time I left for work, 7:45 a.m., where I bought coffee, Tim Hortons on Main Street, how long my lunch breaks lasted, exactly 30 minutes, what TV shows I watched at night, usually Netflix, until around 11 p.m., even what time I showered, 7 p.m. every evening. Whoever was watching me knew everything about my life. They'd been documenting my habits for weeks, maybe months. The level of detail was terrifying. They knew I always parked in the same spot at the depot. They knew I ate lunch in my truck instead of going back to the office. They even knew that I called my mom in Sudbury every Sunday at 2 p.m. At the bottom of the schedule, written in the same careful handwriting as the envelopes, was a single line. You're never really alone, Jennifer. Section 4. Escalating wrongness. I called Constable Morrison immediately. This time, he seemed more worried. This is definitely criminal harassment, he said. Someone has been watching you for a long time. Do you have any idea who it might be? An ex-boyfriend? Someone you had problems with on your route? I couldn't think of anyone. My ex-boyfriend Tom had moved to Thunder Bay 6 months ago. We ended things amicably. My customers were mostly friendly, elderly people and young families. Sure, occasionally someone would be grumpy about a late delivery or a damaged package, but nothing serious. The RCMP started driving by my apartment building more often and following my mail truck during parts of my route. But Wawa is a small detachment. They only have 4 officers for the whole area. They couldn't watch me constantly. The 4th envelope arrived on Christmas Eve. I almost didn't want to open it. Inside were 4 photos. All of Tom, my ex-boyfriend. But something was horribly wrong. In the first photo, Tom was lying on a kitchen floor I didn't recognize. His throat was cut open, blood pooled around his head. His eyes had been removed, leaving dark, empty sockets. The second photo showed him hanging from a rope in what looked like a basement. The third was a close-up of his face, pale and lifeless. The fourth showed his body parts arranged on a table like some sick display. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the photos, but something didn't feel right about them. The blood looked too bright, almost fake. The shadows were weird, and Tom's face, even dead, didn't look quite right. I called Tom immediately, my heart pounding. He answered on the second ring, very much alive and cheerful. "Jen, Merry Christmas Eve. I was just wrapping presents for my nieces." The relief almost made me collapse. But it also made everything more terrifying. Someone had created incredibly realistic fake photos of Tom's murder. Professional quality special effects, like something from a horror movie. They'd made it look so real that for several minutes, I believed my ex-boyfriend was actually dead. The fifth envelope came on New Year's Day. Photos of my parents in their house in Sudbury. Mom and Dad, both apparently dead in different rooms. Dad slumped over his newspaper, a knife in his back. Mom in the kitchen, her head twisted at an impossible angle. Again, the photos looked absolutely real, but when I called them in panic, they were fine. watching the Winter Classic hockey game on TV. Someone was creating elaborate death scenes of everyone I cared about. They had detailed knowledge of what these people looked like and where they lived. They were sending me a message. Anyone you love can die. Anyone you care about is a target. The sixth envelope contained a simple typed note. Stop delivering mail to 47 Pine Street or they will die for real. 47 Pine Street was the Henderson house. Frank and Margie Henderson, both in their 70s. They'd lived in Wawa their whole lives. Frank used to work at the lumber mill, and Margie taught elementary school for 30 years. They were some of the kindest people on my route, always asking about my family and offering me cookies during the holidays. I couldn't stop delivering their mail. They were paying customers, and I had a professional responsibility. Plus, you can't negotiate with stalkers. Give them one thing, and they'll demand more. I told Constable Morrison about the ultimatum. He stationed an officer near the Henderson house and increased patrols on Pine Street. We thought we were being careful. The seventh envelope arrived 3 days later. Section 5, Climactic Encounter. The photos showed Frank and Margie Henderson dead in their living room. Frank was in his chair, head tilted back, eyes wide open. Margie was on the couch, her knitting scattered on the floor. Blood everywhere. But these photos looked different from the fake ones of Tom and my parents. These looked real. I drove to Pine Street with my hands shaking. The RCMP car that was supposed to be watching the house was gone. The officer had been called to a car accident on Highway 101. I knocked on the Hendersons' door. No answer. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. Inside, I found them exactly as shown in the photos. Frank, in his chair, Margie, on the couch. Both dead for hours. Maybe since yesterday evening. The scene was horrific, but also strangely peaceful, like they'd just fallen asleep. I called 911 and ran outside to wait for the police. The RCMP cordoned off the house and launched a murder investigation. Constable Morrison looked shaken when he saw the bodies. Whoever your stalker is, they're not just making threats anymore, he said. They're a killer. The eighth envelope was waiting for me that night. I told you to stop delivering to Pine Street. Next is your sister in Toronto. My sister Sarah was 7 months pregnant, living alone while her husband traveled for work. I called her immediately and begged her to stay with friends. She thought I was overreacting, but agreed to stay with our cousin downtown. The ninth envelope contained ultrasound photos. They showed Sarah's unborn baby, but altered to show horrible deformities and what looked like surgical cuts. The images were so disturbing I could barely look at them. But I knew they were fake. Sarah's real ultrasound from the previous week showed a healthy baby girl. The 10th envelope gave me a choice: quit your job or watch them all die. I couldn't quit. I needed the income. And mail service was essential for the community. Plus, running away wouldn't solve anything. This person knew where everyone I loved lived. Geography wouldn't protect them. The 11th envelope was the worst yet. Photos of me reading the previous letter, taken in real time while I was sitting at my kitchen table. Someone was watching me, at that exact moment, photographing my reaction to their threats. I searched everywhere, the alley, the neighboring rooftops, the street, but couldn't see anyone hiding. The 12th envelope was different. Instead of photos, it contained a confession letter written in shaky handwriting. My name is Lucy Chen. I live at 23 Elm Street. I have terminal brain cancer. 6 months to live, maybe less. I've been watching you for 2 years because you remind me of my daughter who died in Vancouver. I don't want to die alone. I thought if I removed everyone else from your life, you would spend time with me. I killed the Hendersons because you wouldn't listen. I'm waiting in your apartment. Come home so we can be together. Section 6. Resolution and Aftermath. Mrs. Chen. The sweet old Chinese lady at 23 Elm Street. She always smiled and waved when I delivered her mail. Sometimes she'd offer me tea on cold days, though I usually declined because I was on a schedule. She seemed lonely but harmless, just another elderly person living alone in a small town. I called Constable Morrison immediately and met him outside my building. We entered together, both of us with our hands on our weapons. Mrs. Chen was sitting at my kitchen table, drinking tea from one of my mugs. She looked exactly like she always did. Small, frail, wearing a flower print dress and cardigan. She smiled when she saw me, like I was visiting her house instead of the other way around. "Hello, Jennifer. I made tea. Would you like some?" "Mrs. Chen, you're under arrest," Constable Morrison said. But she ignored him completely. "I've been so lonely since my daughter died. But watching you every day made me feel like I had family again. You're such a good girl, always working hard, always polite." We found the evidence in her basement. Thousands of surveillance photos of me going back 2 years. Professional camera equipment with telephoto lenses. A computer with photo editing software for creating the fake death images. Detailed maps of my route and charts tracking my daily routine. Medical records showed she had a brain tumor affecting the parts of her mind responsible for judgment and empathy. She'd been planning this for months, learning everything about my life and the lives of everyone I cared about. In her confused state, she genuinely believed that killing my loved ones would make us eternal friends. Mrs. Chen died in custody 3 weeks later from cancer complications. She never went to trial. The investigation revealed she'd been a professional photographer before retiring, which explained her technical skills. I transferred to a different postal route in Marathon, about 2 hours east of Wawa. I still work for Canada Post, but I'm much more careful now about who I trust and who might be watching me. Sometimes I still get that feeling of being observed, but it's probably just paranoia. The Henderson house sits empty now. Their family put it up for sale, but nobody wants to buy a house where 2 people were murdered. I drive past it sometimes on my way to visit friends in Wawa. The for sale sign is still in the yard, faded and crooked. I've learned that loneliness can turn people into monsters. Mrs. Chen wasn't evil. She was sick and desperate and dying. But that doesn't bring back Frank and Margie Henderson. That doesn't erase the weeks I spent terrified that everyone I loved was going to die. If you're a mail carrier or any other job where you interact with the public regularly, pay attention to who pays too much attention to you. Trust your instincts. And remember, the most dangerous people are often the ones who seem the most harmless. My name is Maria Santos, and I work the night shift at Sobeys grocery store in Kindersley, Saskatchewan. I'm a single mom with an 8-year-old daughter named Carmen. Working nights wasn't my first choice, but it pays the bills and lets me be home when Carmen gets back from school. I've been stocking shelves and running the register from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. for about 6 months now. Kindersley is a small town, only about 5,200 people, so working nights means you really get to know your coworkers. There's usually just 2 of us on shift, me and Jake Morrison. Jake trained me when I started. He's been working nights at Sobeys for 3 years, knows every aisle by heart. Nice guy, always helpful, never made me feel dumb for asking questions. He's got a wife named Linda and 3 kids. Sometimes he'd bring in cookies his wife made for the staff. He seemed like the perfect family man. That's what I thought, anyway, until November 2022, when things started getting weird. It began with Jake's eating habits. During our 2 a.m. break, he'd pull out these huge containers of raw ground beef from his lunch bag. Not cooked, completely raw, pink and bloody. He'd eat it with a plastic spoon like it was pudding. "That's gross, Jake," I told him the first time I saw it. "You're gonna get sick." He just laughed. "It's a special diet. For gains, you know? My trainer says raw protein builds muscle faster." I figured he meant some kind of bodybuilding thing. Jake was always pretty fit, but he wasn't huge or anything. Maybe he was trying to bulk up. Still seemed disgusting to me. But then it got worse. He started bringing in raw chicken. Raw fish, pounds of it every night. He'd sit in the break room during our 15-minute breaks, just tearing into bloody meat with his teeth. The smell was awful, like iron and decay. I started taking my breaks in the office instead. "You sure that's safe?" I asked him once. "Never felt better," he said, blood on his lips. His smile looked different somehow, wider, like his mouth had more teeth than it should. December came, and Jake started changing. Not just his diet, his whole body. He put on maybe 40 pounds in 2 weeks, but it wasn't fat, it was all muscle. His shoulders got broader, his neck got thicker. His jaw looked bigger, like it had stretched out. One night, a pallet of soup cans fell over in aisle 3. Must have weighed 300 pounds, easy. Jake walked over and just lifted the whole thing by himself, set it upright like it was made of cardboard. "Holy crap, Jake," I said. "When did you get so strong?" He winked at me. Good nutrition. But his teeth, God, his teeth. They looked sharper. And there were more of them. Like he had extra rows behind the normal ones. When he smiled, it was like looking into a shark's mouth. I should have quit then. But I needed the job. Carmen needed new winter boots, and Christmas was coming. I told myself Jake was just going through some weird fitness phase. Then he invited us to dinner. "Linda's making pot roast this Sunday," he said one night in January. "Why don't you and Carmen come over? The kids would love to meet her." I wasn't sure. Something felt wrong about Jake now. But he'd always been nice to me, and Carmen didn't have many friends in town. We were new to Kindersley. Maybe it would be good for her to meet other kids. "Okay," I said. "What time?" His smile got even wider. 6 o'clock. Don't worry about bringing anything. We'll take care of everything." Sunday came. Jake's house was on the outskirts of town, a big farmhouse with no neighbors for miles. Linda answered the door, and my stomach dropped. She looked exactly like Jake. Same wide jaw, same too many teeth, same weird muscular build that didn't look quite right. Their 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl, all between 8 and 12, were identical copies. Like someone had made Jake over and over again. "Maria," Linda said, her voice too loud, too happy. "And this must be Carmen. We're so excited to meet you." Carmen hid behind my legs. Smart kid. The house smelled wrong, like raw meat and something else, something rotten. The living room was normal enough. TV, couch, family photos on the walls, but all the photos showed the same thing. The family eating. Big family dinners, birthday parties, picnics. In every single picture, they were tearing into bloody, half-cooked meat with their hands. "Dinner's almost ready," Linda announced. She led us to the dining room. The table was set with normal plates and forks, but the food wasn't normal at all. The pot roast was barely cooked, blood pooling around it on the platter. The vegetables looked okay, but they were drowning in red juice. "Dig in," Jake said. The family grabbed handfuls of meat and started eating. Not with forks, with their hands and teeth, tearing chunks off and swallowing them nearly whole. Blood ran down their chins. Carmen pressed closer to me. "I'm not very hungry," I said. "Maybe we should go." "Nonsense," Linda said, her mouth full of bloody beef. "Carmen needs to eat." Growing girl. She put a plate in front of my daughter. Carmen looked at the raw meat and started crying. "I want to go home, Mama." "Of course. Sweetheart," I stood up. "Thanks for dinner, but Carmen's not feeling well." Jake's whole family stopped eating and stared at us. Their black eyes didn't blink. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Jake smiled. Blood dripped from his teeth onto his plate. "Maybe next time," he said. We left fast. Carmen threw up in the car on the way home. I should have found a new job then. Should have moved to another town. But Jake acted normal at work the next week. Friendly, helpful Jake. Maybe I'd imagined how bad the dinner was. Maybe they just liked their meat rare. February came. Carmen was having trouble at school. Kids were mean to her because we were new, because I worked nights, because her dad wasn't around. She was lonely. "Why don't I babysit Carmen sometime?" Jake suggested. "My kids could use a new friend. You could work without worrying." Against every instinct I had, I said yes. I needed the help, and Jake had been nothing but kind to me for months. One weird dinner didn't make him dangerous. The first time went fine. Carmen seemed happy when I picked her up. Jake's kids had played video games with her. Linda had made grilled cheese. Normal stuff. The second time was different. Carmen was quiet on the ride home. She kept touching her jaw, like it hurt. "Did you have fun, baby?" "My teeth hurt, Mama." "Maybe you're getting your grown-up teeth." But when she opened her mouth to show me, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Behind her normal teeth, new ones were growing. Sharp ones. Too many. "Carmen, what did you eat at Jake's house?" Linda made hamburgers. But they were funny hamburgers, still pink inside. She said it would make me strong. That night, I found Carmen in the kitchen at 3 a.m., eating raw ground beef straight from the package with her hands. She looked up at me with eyes that seemed darker than usual. "Tastes good, Mama." I took the meat away and threw it in the garbage. Carmen screamed like I'd hurt her. She fought me with strength that didn't seem possible for an 8-year-old. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Carmen's jaw kept changing, getting wider. More teeth came in behind the first set. She begged for raw meat every day, started acting aggressive at school. The teachers called to complain about her biting other kids. At work, Jake kept asking about Carmen. How's she doing? The kids miss her. She's sick, I told him. Maybe she should come over again. Linda has some medicine that might help. I knew then what was happening. Whatever Jake and his family were, they weren't human anymore. And they'd done something to my daughter. In April, Carmen disappeared from school during lunch. I got a call from the principal at 1 p.m. Mrs. Santos, Carmen isn't in her afternoon classes. Did you pick her up? I raced to the school, then drove straight to Jake's house. Found Carmen in the basement with Jake's 3 kids. They were eating something I couldn't identify. Didn't want to identify. But it wasn't animal meat. All 4 children looked up at me with black eyes. Their mouths were covered in blood. Mama, Carmen said, but her voice was wrong, deeper, like Jake's voice coming out of her 8-year-old mouth. You came to join the family. The other children laughed. Not kid laughs, adult laughs from small bodies. I grabbed Carmen and ran. She fought me the whole way, scratching and biting with those sharp new teeth. By the time I got her to the car, my arms were covered in scratches. I drove straight to the RCMP detachment in town. Told them everything. Jake's eating habits. The dinner. Carmen's changes. What I'd seen in the basement. Officer Henderson looked at me like I was crazy, but he agreed to check the house. When he came back 2 hours later, his face was white. Mrs. Santos, we found evidence of activities at the Morrison property. But the family is gone. House is empty. What kind of evidence? He wouldn't say. Just that they were calling in specialists from Regina. Carmen needed surgery to remove the extra teeth. Months of therapy to deal with what had happened to her. The doctors couldn't explain the jaw changes, said it was some kind of rare genetic condition triggered by trauma. But Carmen remembers everything. She still craves raw meat. Sometimes I catch her staring out the window at night, like she's waiting for something. We moved to Regina in May, but it didn't matter. Every week, I get letters postmarked from Kindersley, no return address, just photos of Jake's family standing outside our new house. Our new address. Carmen says they're calling to her in her dreams, that they'll keep hunting until she comes back to feed with them. The RCMP investigation found 3 more families in town with similar changes, all connected to Jake somehow. They think there's a whole network of them across rural Saskatchewan, recruiting through jobs and schools and childcare. I don't work nights anymore. Don't trust anyone who offers to help with Carmen. Keep the doors locked and the curtains closed, because I know they're still out there. Still hungry, still growing their family. And they're not done with us yet. My name is Dale Prokopchuk, and I've been a municipal maintenance worker for 12 years. I started in Saskatoon, working on water systems and road repairs. I thought I'd seen every kind of problem a small town could throw at me. Broken pipes, flooded basements, power outages in the middle of winter. But in August 2022, I took a job that changed everything I thought I knew about what lurks beneath our feet. I moved to Uranium City, Saskatchewan. Population, 62 people. Maybe you've never heard of it, but back in the day, it was a booming mining town. Over 2,000 people lived there in the 1,970 seconds, all working the uranium mines. Then the mines closed in 1982, and almost everyone left. What's left now is a ghost town hanging on by its fingernails. The job posting said they needed someone to maintain infrastructure for the remaining residents. Basic stuff, check the water pumps, fix broken streetlights, make sure the few roads stayed clear. But there was one part of the job that made me nervous. I had to inspect the old mine tunnels for structural problems. The town sits on top of a maze of abandoned shafts and passages, and they were worried about cave-ins damaging the houses above. I figured it would be easy money. How hard could it be to walk through some empty tunnels and write reports saying everything looked fine? I had all the right equipment, hard hat, safety lights, gas detectors, structural inspection tools. I'd done similar work in abandoned buildings before. Tunnels couldn't be much different. My first month was exactly what I expected. I'd drive around town in my pickup truck, check on Mrs. Kowalski's water pressure, fix a busted streetlight on Main Street, clear some fallen branches from the road. The remaining residents were mostly elderly folks who'd lived there so long they couldn't imagine living anywhere else. Nice people, but they kept to themselves. The tunnel inspections started in September. I had maps of the main passages dating back to the 970 seconds. Most of the entrances had been sealed with concrete when the mines closed, but I had keys to the access doors the town kept open for maintenance. The first few trips down were routine. I'd walk through with my flashlight, check the support beams, take some photos, and head back up. The tunnels were cold and damp, but stable. Then I started hearing sounds. It was the third week of September when I first noticed it. I was about 50 feet underground in the main shaft, checking some wooden supports that looked questionable. That's when I heard this rhythmic scratching noise echoing from deeper in the tunnel. Scrape, 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 like someone digging with metal tools. I figured it might be settling sounds from the old mine equipment, or maybe water dripping in a weird pattern. Old buildings make all kinds of noises. I made a note in my report and moved on. But the sounds kept happening. Every time I went down, I'd hear that scratching coming from the sealed-off passages. It was always the same rhythm, always from the same general direction, and it was getting louder. By October, I found something that made my stomach drop. Fresh dirt and rock debris scattered around the sealed tunnel entrances. Someone had been digging. Recently, I called my supervisor in Regina and told him what I'd found. He said it was probably just teenagers messing around, maybe trying to explore the old mines. He told me to put up some warning signs and report it to the local RCMP. I did both, but the scratching sounds didn't stop. November brought the first real sign that something was seriously wrong. Mrs. Kowalski called me on a Tuesday morning, upset about someone stealing from her property, food missing from her root cellar, tools taken from her garden shed. Even clothes disappeared from her clothesline overnight. At first, I thought she might be confused. She was 83 years old, living alone. Maybe she was forgetting where she put things. But then other residents started calling with similar complaints. Food missing, tools gone, small items vanishing from yards and porches. The RCMP officer who came to investigate said it looked like someone was living rough in the woods, stealing what they needed to survive. But I had a different theory. All the missing items were practical things. Canned food, hand tools, warm clothes, exactly what someone would need if they were living underground. In December, I made a discovery that confirmed my worst fears. I was doing my monthly tunnel inspection when my flashlight beam caught something that shouldn't have been there. A hole in the concrete wall, big enough for a person to crawl through. I squeezed through and found myself in a narrow passage that didn't appear on any of my maps. Someone had dug this tunnel by hand, and it was heading straight toward the houses above. I followed it for about 100 feet before it branched off in different directions. There was an entire network of new tunnels down here, connecting the old mine shafts to the basements of houses in town. Whoever was doing this had been busy for months. The tunnels were carefully dug, with proper supports to prevent cave-ins. This wasn't the work of some confused homeless person. Someone with mining experience was expanding the underground system, and they had direct access to every building in Uranium City. I set up motion-activated cameras at 3 different tunnel entrances in January. If someone was using these passages, I was going to catch them on video. What I caught was worse than any criminal. The footage showed a pale, humanoid figure moving through the tunnels in the middle of the night. It was roughly human-sized but moved on all fours like an animal. In the infrared camera image, its skin appeared completely white, almost translucent. No hair, no clothing, just pale skin stretched over a thin frame. I watched the video 15 times, trying to convince myself it was a fake or a camera malfunction. But there was no denying what I was seeing. Something that looked human but definitely wasn't was living in the tunnels beneath Uranium City. February brought answers I didn't want. I found its home. Deep in the main tunnel system, beyond where any tourist or casual explorer would ever venture, I discovered a crude living space carved out of the rock. Furniture made from stolen items arranged around a central area, food stored in plastic containers, bedding made from the missing clothes and blankets. But it wasn't random garbage. Everything was organized, almost neat, canned goods sorted by type, tools hung on makeshift hooks, clothes folded and stacked. Whatever was living down here was intelligent, and it was surviving entirely off what it stole from the town above. I was documenting the scene with my camera when I heard footsteps behind me. "Please don't run." The voice was barely human, raspy and whispered, like someone who hadn't spoken to another person in years. I turned around slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs, What I saw standing in the tunnel entrance was once a person, but decades of living underground had changed it into something else. The skin was translucent white, stretched tight over visible bones. Its eyes were huge and completely black, adapted to the darkness. Fingernails had grown into claws, perfect for digging through rock and soil. But the worst part was that I recognized the face beneath all that damage. "You're Thomas Belanger," I said. The creature nodded. According to the mining records I'd read, Thomas Belanger died in an accident in 1979. A radiation leak in the deepest part of the mine had exposed him to a massive dose of uranium. The company had sealed off that section and declared him dead rather than admit what had happened. But he hadn't died, he'd just changed. "The radiation," he whispered. "Couldn't go outside anymore. Sunlight burns my skin. Had to stay underground when they closed the mine." For 43 years, he'd been living in these tunnels. The uranium exposure had mutated his body, making him sensitive to light but perfectly adapted to life in complete darkness. When the mine closed, he'd been forgotten by everyone except the company that covered up his accident. "The people upstairs," I said. "You've been stealing from them." Thomas shook his head. "Not stealing, trading." He led me through his tunnel network, showing me things I'd missed. When he took stale food from Mrs. Kowalski's cellar, he left behind fresher supplies from his own stores. When he borrowed broken tools, he repaired them with parts from the old mining equipment and returned them to different sheds. He wasn't stealing, he was helping. "I watch over them," he said. "Keep the wild animals away. Fix things that break. They don't know, but I take care of this town." Over the next few months, I learned the full truth. Thomas had been the unofficial guardian of Uranium City for decades. He'd scared off bears that came too close to houses. He'd repaired water pipes that burst in winter. He'd even put out a small house fire in 2019 by redirecting groundwater through his tunnel system. But in August, his peaceful existence had been threatened. A new mining company was surveying the area, planning to reopen some of the old uranium deposits. They'd been testing soil and taking core samples, getting ready to blast new shafts. If they succeeded, Thomas's tunnel system would be destroyed, and he'd have nowhere to hide. So he'd started sabotaging their equipment, disabling drill bits, cutting survey lines, contaminating their soil samples. He was fighting to protect the only home he'd known for 4 decades. That's when the company investigators discovered his tunnel network. They declared it a structural hazard and made plans to pump the entire system full of concrete. Thomas would be buried alive, and the town would lose its secret protector. I couldn't let that happen. I helped Thomas evacuate to deeper shafts that weren't on the company's maps. We set up a new living space beyond their reach, in sections of the mine that had been forgotten even before he'd had his accident. When the company investigators asked about the tunnels, I told them they'd collapsed naturally due to groundwater erosion. They accepted my report and abandoned their plan to fill them with concrete. Today, Thomas is still down there, still watching over Uranium City. The residents never knew they had a guardian angel living beneath their feet. I bring him supplies once a month: food, medicine, batteries for his equipment. It's the least I can do for someone who spent his whole life protecting others. Sometimes people ask me if I ever get scared working alone in those tunnels. The truth is, I've never felt safer. I know someone's watching out for me down there. Someone who was failed by the system, abandoned by his employers, and left to die alone in the dark. But instead of becoming bitter, he chose to spend his life taking care of others. Not all monsters are born evil. Sometimes they're created by human greed, and they turn out to be the most human of us all. Thomas Belanger died in 1979, according to the official records. But the man who lived on in his place became something better than he'd ever been before. He became exactly what Uranium City needed: a guardian who asked for nothing and gave everything to keep 62 people safe. The mining company never did reopen those uranium deposits. Too many complications, they said. Too many structural problems underground. They packed up their equipment and left town for good. Thomas is still there, 40 feet below Main Street, making sure his town stays safe. And I'm still there too, the only person who knows the truth about what really keeps the lights on in Uranium City. My name is Sandra Mitchell, and I've been a real estate agent with Royal LePage for 15 years. I cover all of southern Alberta, from Calgary down to the Montana border. I've sold everything from million-dollar ranch properties to tiny starter homes in farming towns. I thought I'd seen every possible reason why people sell their houses. Divorce, job loss, death in the family, even ghost stories. But what happened in Vulcan, Alberta, in 2022 taught me that some neighbors are worse than any ghost could ever be. I got the Vulcan assignment in June 2022, right after the property market exploded across rural Alberta. Vulcan's a small farming town with about 2,000 people, the kind of place where families stay for generations. Most folks there had never even thought about selling until oil prices shot up and city people started looking for cheaper places to live. That's when Royal LePage sent me to handle the sudden demand. Vulcan sits right on Highway 23, surrounded by wheat fields that stretch to the horizon. The town's biggest claim to fame is being named after the Roman god of fire, which is why they have that big Star Trek connection with the Vulcan statue downtown. Most of the houses are old farmhouses or simple bungalows built in the 70s. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and nothing exciting ever happens. That's what made Sunrise Heights so strange. Sunrise Heights is a small subdivision on the east side of town, just 12 houses built around a cul-de-sac in 2015. Nice houses, 3 bedrooms each, perfect for young families. When I got my first listing there in July, I was surprised to learn it was the 4th house on that street to go on the market in 6 months. That's not normal for a stable farming community. I started asking around. The previous homeowners all told me similar stories about why they left so quickly. They'd mentioned difficult neighbors, or the street just wasn't right for us anymore. But nobody wanted to give me details. In 15 years of real estate, I'd learned that when sellers won't explain why they're leaving, something's wrong. In August, I finally got one of them to talk, Mrs. Patterson had lived at 52 Maple Street for 3 years before selling in March. She invited me for coffee at her new place in Medicine Hat, 2 hours away. Sandra, she said, those new neighbors were just too much, too friendly, too helpful, too perfect. She told me about the Anderson family who'd moved in next door. They'd introduced themselves the day after she got back from vacation, bringing homemade cookies and offering to help with yard work. Nice gesture, except Mrs. Patterson hadn't told anyone she was going away. Within a week, they were dressing like us, she explained. Same clothes, same hairstyles. My husband thought it was coincidence until we bought a new truck. 3 days later, the Andersons had the exact same model, same color, even the same license plate frame. That's when she mentioned the Chen family on the other side. They'd moved in a month after the Andersons. Same story, immediately friendly, incredibly helpful, and they started copying the Pattersons too. Same outdoor furniture, same garden plants, even the same kitchen curtains visible through the windows. It was like living between 2 mirrors, Mrs. Patterson said. They'd watch us through their windows and copy everything we did. When we barbecued, they barbecued. When we washed our car, they washed theirs. When we got a dog, both families got identical dogs the next week. I thought she was exaggerating until September, when I brought a young couple from Calgary to look at 47 Maple Street. The Johnsons, David and Emma, both teachers, looking for a quieter life away from the city. The house was perfect for them, and they loved the small-town feel of Vulcan. That's when I met the neighbors myself. Before we'd even finished the walkthrough, the Anderson family came over to introduce themselves. Mark and Linda Anderson, with their 2 kids, Sarah and Tommy. They were incredibly friendly, asking all sorts of questions about where the Johnsons taught, what they liked to do for fun, what kind of car they drove, just good neighbors being welcoming. Then the Chen family showed up. Robert and Lisa Chen, also with 2 kids, Michael and Amy. They asked almost identical questions in almost identical ways. Their speech patterns were so similar, I thought they might be related to the Andersons. But it was the way they looked at David and Emma that made me uncomfortable. Not threatening, just intense. Like they were memorizing every detail of the couple's appearance and mannerisms. Both families dressed very similarly, casual but neat, earth tones, same style of sneakers. Their houses were visible through the front windows, and I could see they had almost identical furniture and decorations. When I asked how long they'd lived there, both couples said about a year and smiled in exactly the same way. The Johnsons loved the neighborhood and bought the house in October. I helped them with the closing and stayed in touch to make sure everything went smoothly. Small towns can be hard for outsiders to adjust to. and I wanted them to be happy with their purchase. Everything seemed fine until November. Emma called me on a Tuesday morning, sounding worried. "Sandra, our neighbors are copying us." It started small, but it's getting weird. She explained that both the Anderson and Chen families had started dressing like her and David. Not just similar clothes, identical brands, identical styles, even down to David's specific running shoes and Emma's purse. When she'd gotten her hair cut short, both Linda Anderson and Lisa Chen had shown up with identical haircuts the next day. "We thought it was just coincidence," Emma said. "But yesterday David counted. Both families have bought 15 items that match things we own." 15, Sandra. That's not normal. I told her that small-town neighbors sometimes try too hard to fit in with newcomers, but she should talk to them if it made her uncomfortable. I thought the problem would sort itself out. It got worse. In December, Emma called again. The copying had escalated to daily routines. The Anderson and Chen families were leaving their houses at the exact same time as David and Emma every morning. They followed them to the grocery store and bought identical items. When the Johnsons adopted a golden retriever puppy from the animal shelter, both neighbor families got golden retriever puppies the same week. "They're studying us, Sandra," Emma whispered. "Yesterday, I saw Linda Anderson practicing my walk in her driveway. She was copying the way I swing my arms, the way I step. It was like watching someone rehearse being me." That's when she told me about the midnight incident. Emma had gotten up for a glass of water and noticed people in their backyard. The entire Anderson family, all 4 of them, were standing perfectly still in the Johnsons' yard, staring at the house. When Emma turned on the outdoor lights, all 4 Andersons smiled at exactly the same moment and waved. Then they walked home without saying a word. "David thinks I'm being paranoid," Emma said, "but something's very wrong with our neighbors." I suggested they install security cameras, which they did in January 2023. Within a week, those cameras caught something that made my blood run cold. Emma sent me the footage. It showed both neighbor families entering the Johnsons' house while David and Emma were at work. They had keys somehow. For 40 minutes, they walked through every room, taking pictures of everything. They measured furniture, opened closets, even went through the medicine cabinet and took photos of prescriptions. The most disturbing part was how they moved. All 8 people, the Andersons and Chens, moved in perfect synchronization, like they were following a choreographed routine. "We're calling the police," David told me when I came to see the footage myself. But before they could, something even stranger happened. Emma confronted Mark Anderson about the trespassing, and his response made her realize the situation was worse than anyone thought. "We're just trying to be good neighbors," Anderson said, but his voice was wrong. He was speaking in David's exact tone, using David's specific phrases and speech patterns. When Emma asked how they got inside, Anderson tilted his head the same way David did when he was thinking and said, "We wanted to learn more about your home so we could be better friends." The way he smiled when he said friends was exactly how David smiled, but wrong somehow, like someone had described smiling to Anderson instead of him learning it naturally. That's when Emma found their garbage being stolen. She caught both families in their alley at 3 in the morning, going through the Johnsons' trash bags with flashlights. They were sorting items into categories: food packaging, personal care products, mail, clothing tags. They had notebooks and were writing down everything they found. "They're learning how to be us," Emma told me, crying. "They're studying our garbage to copy our lifestyle choices." When I drove out to see for myself, I found something that confirmed Emma's worst fears. Both neighbor houses had their curtains open, and I could see identical copies of the Johnsons' furniture, decorations, even family photos. But the people in the photos weren't the Andersons and Chens, they were the Johnsons, with Anderson and Chen faces carefully cut out and pasted on top. That's when I started investigating the property histories. What I found made no sense. According to the Land Registry Office, both houses had been purchased with cash the same week in August 2021. But there were no mortgage records, no previous address information, no employment verification, nothing that would normally be required for home purchases. The families had appeared in Vulcan with no documented history. More disturbing, when I checked with the previous real estate agent who'd allegedly handled their purchases, he had no memory of the transactions. The paperwork existed, But when he looked at his own files, he couldn't remember meeting either family. By June, the Johnsons were desperate to leave. They'd hired a moving company and planned to escape to Edmonton. But the night before the move, they found their truck sabotaged, tires slashed, engine disabled, and the Anderson family standing in their front yard, offering to help with repairs and smiling in that perfect, unnatural way. That's when I contacted the RCMP. Sergeant Williams drove up from Calgary to investigate, but the night before he arrived, both neighbor families vanished. Completely. No moving trucks, no forwarding addresses, nothing. They just disappeared. When we checked the houses, they were empty, except for one thing that still gives me nightmares. Every wall in both houses was covered with photographs of the Johnson family. Hundreds of them, taken through windows, during walks, while sleeping. Photos of David and Emma, eating, working, relaxing, intimate moments they'd never known were being documented. The photos were organized by date and time, showing how thoroughly they'd been studied. In the Anderson house basement, we found detailed notes describing David and Emma's mannerisms, speech patterns, daily routines, and personal preferences. Page after page of analysis, like someone was writing an instruction manual for how to become the Johnsons. The Johnsons finally escaped to Edmonton that winter, but Sunrise Heights isn't empty. New families moved into the Anderson and Chen houses in December. They introduced themselves to the current residents of 47 Maple Street as the Parkers and the Yamadas. Same thing is happening again, perfectly friendly neighbors who copy everything the new residents do. I don't sell properties in Sunrise Heights anymore. The turnover rate there is now 100% annually. Every family that moves in leaves within 12 months, and nobody will talk about why. The town council thinks it's just a run of bad luck with difficult neighbors. But I know better. Whatever was pretending to be the Anderson and Chen families is still there, still learning how to be human by copying whoever lives at 47 Maple Street. And every time new people move in, those things get better at the impersonation. I still drive past Sunrise Heights sometimes when I have listings in Vulcan. From the street, it looks like a normal neighborhood. Kids playing, families barbecuing, neighbors chatting over fences. But if you watch carefully, you'll notice something wrong. They all move the same way. They all smile at the same moments. And if you look through their windows, every house has identical furniture and decorations. Perfect neighbors, perfectly wrong. I've sold houses to hundreds of families over the years, but I'll never forget the Johnsons, because somewhere in that subdivision, something is still practicing how to be them, waiting for the next family to study, copy, and replace. And they're getting better at it. My name is Robert Beardy. If someone finds this recording, don't come looking for me. Don't bring this to the RCMP. Don't trust anyone from the town office. Just burn it. Forget you ever heard it. But if you can't do that, if you're like me and you need to know the truth, even when it destroys everything, then listen carefully. Because what I'm about to tell you about Moosonee isn't just about missing people or government cover-ups. It's about what happens when a small town decides some lives are more valuable than others, and what grows in the darkness of that decision. I've been plowing snow for the town of Moosonee for 14 years, not 12 like I told everyone else, 14. I lied about when I started because I couldn't admit I'd been driving the routes when the first children went missing. Summer 2008. Sarah Kikagamek, age 7. Joseph Chichu, age 9. And my nephew Tommy Beardy, age 8. 3 Cree kids who walked into the forest during a community picnic and never walked out. The RCMP spent 2 weeks searching. Found nothing. Called it a tragic accident. Children wandering off, getting lost, succumbing to exposure. But I know different now. I know because I found where they ended up. See, Moosonee has a secret that goes back generations. We're not just a remote community accessible only by train or plane. We're a dumping ground. A place where certain problems get disappeared without questions asked. The permafrost here doesn't just preserve mammoths and ancient trees. It preserves evidence. And for the past 40 years, every winter when I've plowed past kilometer marker 23 on Highway 640, I've been driving over a mass grave. I didn't know it then. Thought the ground was just uneven. Settlement from the freeze-thaw cycle. But this past December, global warming finally melted deep enough to reveal what's been buried there. 43 bodies. Men, women, children. Some recent enough that dental records could identify them. Others so old they'd become mummified by the cold. Government auditors who'd come to investigate missing federal funds. Social workers asking too many questions about residential school survivors. Journalists documenting missing Indigenous women. Environmental scientists studying mercury contamination in James Bay. And children, always children. The ones who saw too much, knew too much, or simply became inconvenient for someone with power. The oldest remains dated back to 1982. The newest was Janet Morrison, the social worker who disappeared 3 months ago while investigating abuse allegations at the local health clinic. But finding the bodies was just the beginning. Because I also found the records. Dr. Rachel Sinclair, our head medical officer, had been documenting everything. Meticulous notes about each disposal, filed away in a waterproof container buried among the corpses. Insurance, she called it. Evidence to ensure her cooperation in the arrangement. The arrangement? See, Musoni's isolation makes it perfect for certain people. Federal officials who needed problems to disappear. Corporate executives dumping toxic waste. Human traffickers moving product through northern Ontario. And locals who profited from looking the other way. They called it the Northern Solution. A network spanning across dozens of remote communities from Labrador to the Yukon. Small towns where people could vanish without investigation, where local officials could be bought or threatened into compliance, where the federal government preferred not to look too closely. Dr. Sinclair's records detailed 40 years of systematic murder, all coordinated through what she called the committee. Local officials who selected targets, arranged disappearances, and disposed of evidence. In exchange, they received substantial payments from clients who needed people eliminated quietly. Mayor Patricia Wabano had been on the committee since 1995. Police Chief James Metatawabin since 2001. Town Manager Doug Mercer since 2010. My own supervisor, who'd hired me to plow the roads that led to the burial ground. But the worst part, the part that made me understand why my wife Sarah had been acting strange for months, why my daughter Emma had stopped talking to me, was the final document in Sinclair's collection. A contract dated November 2023. A payment agreement for the elimination of Robert Beardy, snowplow operator, age 41, Cree male, potential witness to disposal operations. My execution had been commissioned by my own town government, paid for with federal infrastructure funds meant to improve roads and services for Indigenous communities. And the method of disposal? They were going to frame me for the murders. Plant evidence in my home, claim I'd been killing people and burying them along my plow routes. The traumatized snowplow driver who'd finally snapped under the isolation and started hunting travelers. Perfect scapegoat. Case closed. I confronted Dr. Sinclair at her clinic on December 18th. Showed her the documents I'd copied. Demanded to know how many people she'd helped murder. 43 confirmed, she said calmly, not even looking up from her patient files. Maybe 57, if you count the ones we couldn't recover completely. She explained it like a medical procedure. Clinical, necessary. The committee provided a valuable service to important clients. Federal officials who needed whistleblowers silenced. Corporate executives who required environmental activists eliminated. International clients who paid premium rates for high-value targets. You think this is about money, Robert? It's about survival. These people could have shut down our community entirely. No funding, no services, no jobs. The committee ensures Musoni continues to exist. I asked about the children, about Tommy, my 8-year-old nephew. Witnesses, she said simply. They saw a disposal in progress during that picnic. We couldn't risk them talking. They'd murdered 3 children to cover up a crime, then spent 15 years profiting from their secret. I shot Dr. Sinclair twice in the chest. She died choking on her own blood, trying to speak one final medical observation about bullet trajectory and lung damage. Then I went home to confront my family. Because Sarah's strange behavior finally made sense. The way she'd been pushing me to work longer hours, encouraging me to stay out on the routes later, take on extra shifts, the nervous glances when I came home early. My wife had been setting me up for assassination. Sarah was in the kitchen making dinner when I walked through the front door with my service pistol drawn. Emma was at the table doing homework. Both of them froze when they saw the gun. How long? I asked Sarah. Robert, what, How long have you been working for them? Emma looked confused. Sarah's face went white. Since October, she whispered. They said if I didn't help, they'd kill all of us. Make it look like a murder-suicide. They have people in the RCMP, Robert. People everywhere. She'd been feeding them information about my schedule, my routes, my discoveries. Every time I'd found something suspicious and mentioned it to Sarah, she'd reported it to the committee. My own wife had been signing my death warrant for months. But the real knife to the heart was Emma. My 8-year-old daughter looked up from her homework and said, "Are you going to hurt Mommy like you hurt the doctor?" She'd known. Somehow, she'd known I'd killed Dr. Sinclair. Because Emma had been recruited too, sent to school with recording devices, told to report anything strange Daddy said about his work. They'd turned my child into a spy against her own father. The committee wasn't just running a murder operation. They were systematically destroying families, turning relatives against each other, creating networks of fear and complicity that ensured silence. I packed supplies and left that night. Couldn't stay in a house where my own family had been weaponized against me. Couldn't trust anyone in town. Couldn't even trust the RCMP, since Sarah had mentioned committee contacts in law enforcement. I've been living in my plow truck for 6 weeks now. Sleeping in the cab, eating canned food, staying mobile. The committee knows I have Dr. Sinclair's records. They know I can expose the entire Northern Solution network. They've issued a bounty, $50,000 for my capture, alive or dead. But I've been learning things during my isolation. Terrible things about the scope of their operation. The missing Indigenous women everyone talks about? Half of them weren't random victims of predators or traffickers. They were specific targets. Environmental activists, journalists, social workers, teachers who discovered evidence of the committee's activities. The residential school documentation that keeps disappearing? The committee has been eliminating survivors who could testify about government cover-ups and corporate land grabs. The mercury poisoning in James Bay, the committee has been helping mining companies dispose of toxic waste in traditional fishing waters. Anyone who tried to document the contamination got added to the burial ground at kilometer marker 23. This isn't just about Moosonee. The Northern Solution has been operating in dozens of communities across the Arctic. Everywhere the federal government prefers to maintain plausible deniability about Indigenous rights, environmental damage, and corporate malfeasance. We're not isolated small towns struggling with economic decline. We're execution sites, convenient locations where inconvenient people can be murdered and buried without investigation. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, the federal government knows, has always known. The Northern Solution exists because Ottawa authorized it, a cost-effective method of eliminating political problems while maintaining deniability. Every missing person report filed in communities like ours gets flagged and redirected. Every RCMP investigation gets limited in scope. Every journalist who asks too many questions about disappearances in remote areas gets their credentials revoked or their publications defunded. The system works exactly as designed. I'm recording this because I know I won't survive much longer. The committee has tracked me to the abandoned mining camp where I've been hiding. I can see their snowmobiles approaching through the trees. 5 of them, riding hard, but I've prepared one final surprise. Dr. Sinclair's complete records have been uploaded to multiple servers, scheduled for automatic release if I don't check in every 24 hours. Names, dates, client lists, payment records, burial locations. Everything. The truth about the Northern Solution will survive even if I don't. To my daughter Emma, I'm sorry you had to grow up in a world where children are taught to spy on their parents. I'm sorry the committee stole your innocence to protect their secrets. I hope someday you'll understand that I loved you enough to sacrifice everything to expose what they did to our community. To my wife Sarah, you made the only choice you could. I don't forgive you, but I understand. The committee gave you an impossible situation. I hope you can live with what happened next. To Elder Mary Chichu, the traditional stories were right. There are monsters in the forest, but they're not supernatural spirits. They're humans who've learned to feed on their own communities. The old ways of dealing with such creatures may be our only hope. They're at the door now. Time to. My name is Amanda Kowalski, and I've been a bank teller for 12 years in Roblin, Manitoba. Population 1,700, where everyone knows everyone's business, and secrets don't stay buried long. I thought I understood small-town evil, affairs, embezzlement, family feuds that span generations. But what I discovered in our bank's basement files made me realize some secrets are kept because they're too horrible to believe. What happened starting March 2022 didn't just threaten my job. It threatened my sanity, my soul, and everything I thought I knew about what makes a person human. Our Royal Bank branch sits on Main Street in a building from 1924. 3 teller windows, 1 manager's office, and a basement vault that always felt wrong. Too cold, with shadows that moved when they shouldn't. The computer system runs on servers that hum like something alive, breathing in the walls. I work mornings, knowing every customer's face, their children's names, watching families grow and struggle through Manitoba winters that test everyone's endurance. March 15th, a Tuesday morning, with snow falling sideways, Tracy called me over. She's our branch manager. 15 years of service, but lately she'd been different. Thinner, with dark circles under her eyes, like she wasn't sleeping. "Amanda, we're getting new customers. Big money accounts." The first one arrived at exactly 10 a.m. Average height, brown hair, wearing clothes that looked normal but felt wrong, like a costume someone had studied but never actually worn. His face was the problem. Too perfect, too symmetrical, like those AI-generated photos you see online, except this was standing in front of me, breathing, blinking. "I want to open savings account," he said with an accent that didn't match any place I knew. When I asked for ID, his driver's license photo looked exactly like his face, but somehow worse, like someone had taken a photograph of a photograph of a photograph until all the humanity had bled out of it. He deposited $50,000 in cash, $100 bills, crisp and new, but when I touched them, they felt cold. Not just cool. Cold like they'd been kept in a freezer or deeper underground. "Are you new to Roblin?" I asked, trying to make conversation. He stared at me for exactly 3 seconds, then said, "Thank you for excellent service." His smile never changed. His eyes never blinked. I processed the account, took his information, but my hands were shaking. When he left, I noticed he didn't make footprints in the snow outside our window, even though it was still falling. By Friday, I'd seen 6 more exactly like him. Same perfect faces, same cold money, same empty responses to questions. They all gave addresses for abandoned farms outside town, places that had been empty since the 1992 when farming families started moving to the cities. That weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about their faces. I started having dreams where they surrounded my bed, all smiling that same empty smile, saying, "Thank you for excellent service," in perfect unison, while snow fell inside my bedroom. April brought more of them. Every Friday morning, like clockwork, 12 new accounts in 4 weeks, all following the same pattern. I kept a secret list in my desk drawer. Names, faces, the way they moved, like they were remembering how to walk. The worst part was their banking habits. They never used debit cards, never wrote checks, never seemed to understand how normal banking worked. Once a week they'd withdraw small amounts for basic necessities, but they'd stare at the ATM like they'd never seen one before, then ask me to, "Please make machine give money." I tried talking to Tracy about it, but she'd changed completely. She'd started working late, staying after hours in the basement vault. Some mornings, I'd find her already there when I arrived, like she'd never gone home. Her skin had a gray tint, and she smelled faintly of something metallic and sour. "These new customers," I said carefully, "don't you think there's something odd about them?" Tracy looked up from her paperwork, and for a moment her eyes looked completely black. "Don't ask questions about things you don't understand, Amanda. Some knowledge has a price." In May, I decided to test one of the customers. When the brown-haired man came in, I'd started thinking of him as number 1. I asked about farming. "How's planting season going? This wet spring must be hard on the fields." He stared at me with those 2 perfect eyes and said, "Thank you for excellent service. But what crops are you planting? Canola? Wheat?" "Thank you for excellent service." I tried a different approach. "Do you have family in Roblin?" This time he tilted his head like a dog hearing a strange sound and said, "Family is unnecessary. Thank you for excellent service." That night, I had the worst dream yet. I was in the bank after hours, and all 12 of the strange customers were standing in the lobby, perfectly still, staring at me. Their mouths moved in unison. "Thank you for excellent service, Amanda Kowalski. Thank you for excellent service, Amanda Kowalski." They knew my name, but I'd never told them my last name. I woke up screaming. June changed everything. Tracy promoted me to assistant manager, which gave me access to the account investigation system. "We need someone to look into irregularities," she said, but her voice sounded hollow, like it was echoing from somewhere far away. In the computer system, I found 47 identical accounts, all opened since March. But the deeper I dug, the more impossible it became. The accounts existed in our system, but they also didn't, like they were overlaid on reality, visible from certain angles, but not others. The addresses led to abandoned farmhouses, but when I drove out to check them during my lunch break, I found something that made my skin crawl. The mailboxes were stuffed with mail addressed to the fake customers, but the letters looked old, yellowed with age, as if they'd been sitting there for decades. At the Morrison farm, abandoned since 1987, I found letters addressed to customer Hashon that were postmarked from the 1990 seconds. But customer Hashon had only opened his account 3 months ago. I took photos with my phone, but when I looked at them later, they showed empty mailboxes. The letters had vanished from the images, but I could still feel the weight of them in my memory. That evening, I researched the abandoned farms online. 7 families had lived there in the 1980 seconds and 90 seconds. All 7 families had disappeared during the same winter. February 1993. The RCMP investigated but found no evidence of foul play. The families had simply vanished, leaving behind everything they owned. The newspaper archives told a different story. Residents reported seeing perfect strangers in town before each disappearance. People who looked almost human but moved wrong, spoke wrong, existed wrong. The last article, from March 1993, had a headline: "Town population mysteriously stable despite missing families." Someone had crossed out the headline in red ink and written, "They were replaced." Back at work, I accessed deeper account records and found the real horror. The strange customers weren't just depositing money. They were connected to the missing family's old accounts that should have been closed 30 years ago. Somehow, money was flowing between 1993 and 2022, between the dead and the living. Every time a real customer made a deposit, corresponding amounts would drain from their account into the phantom accounts, but the transactions would show dates from decades ago. Mrs. Peterson's pension was being stolen by someone who died before she was born. I printed everything and built a file, but the papers kept changing when I wasn't looking. Names would shift, dates would alter themselves, and sometimes I'd find pages written in languages that hurt to look at, symbols that seemed to crawl across the paper like living things. July brought the direct confrontation I'd been dreading. Tracy called me into her office after hours, when the bank was empty and the basement vault was humming louder than usual. "Amanda, you need to stop investigating." "Tracy, these accounts are connected to people who disappeared. The money is ours now." She turned around, and her face had changed. The skin was gray and tight, stretched over bones that weren't quite the right shape. "Just like the town is ours." "What are you?" "I'm Tracy Morrison. I've been Tracy Morrison since 1993, when the real Tracy Morrison and her family fed the process that keeps our operation running." She smiled, and I saw that her teeth were filed to points. "Just like you'll be Amanda Kowalski when we're done with you." The office door slammed shut behind me, though no one had touched it. The computer screens around the room flickered to life, showing security camera feeds from the abandoned farms. In each feed I could see families, the Morrison family, the Chen family, the Kowalskis who weren't related to me, all sitting around dinner tables, perfectly still, perfectly preserved, with their throats cut from ear to ear. "The process requires fresh identities every 30 years, Tracy continued, her voice now coming from multiple directions at once. "We take families, we take their forms, we take their places. The town stays exactly the same size. No one asks questions about people they think they know." I tried to run, but the door wouldn't budge. The temperature in the room was dropping, and I could see my breath. "You've been very helpful, Amanda." Your investigation led us to identify which residents might notice patterns, might ask questions. Mrs. Peterson will be replaced next week. The Kowalski farm family next month. By Christmas, everyone who might remember the real residents will be gone. Through the office window, I could see the strange customers standing in the lobby, even though the bank had been locked. They were all looking at me, all smiling, all moving in perfect synchronization. "What do you want?" I whispered. "We want to exist. We want to continue. We want to spread." Tracy's form was becoming less human by the second, stretching upward, her fingers extending into claws. "Your form will serve us well. Your memories will help us perfect the illusion." The computer screens now showed the inside of my apartment. My bedroom, my kitchen, my bathroom, all occupied by things that looked like me but moved wrong, spoke wrong, existed wrong. That's when I realized the truth. I wasn't Amanda Kowalski. I was something wearing Amanda Kowalski's face, talking with her voice, thinking with her memories. The real Amanda had disappeared months ago, and I was just another part of the process, designed to investigate myself, to identify threats, to help perfect the replacement system. The creatures in my apartment were the next iteration, learning to be me better than I was. I don't know how long I've been sitting in this office, writing this account. Tracy is gone now, or maybe she was never here. The computer screens show different feeds, families in other towns, other banks, other operations spreading across rural Canada like a virus. My hands don't look quite right anymore. My reflection in the black computer screen shows a face that's almost human but not quite, like a photograph of a photograph of a photograph. I keep writing because that's what Amanda Kowalski would do. She would document everything, try to warn people, try to stop the process. But I'm not Amanda Kowalski. I never was. The real Amanda is sitting at a dinner table in a farmhouse outside town, perfectly still, perfectly preserved, with her throat cut from ear to ear. She's been there since March, watching through dead eyes as I lived her life, did her job, fooled her coworkers and customers. If you're reading this, it means someone found Amanda's real documentation, the files she hid before they took her. It means the process isn't perfect yet. Check your reflection, look closely at your neighbors, count the population of your town and count it again. They're spreading. The abandoned farms aren't abandoned anymore. The missing families aren't missing. They're sitting at their tables, feeding the process, while something else wears their names and lives their lives. And if you work at a bank, if you handle money, if you have access to people's most private information, check the accounts that feel wrong. Check the faces that look too perfect. Check the customers who say, "Thank you for excellent service," like they learned the phrase from a book. Because they did. Thank you for excellent service. Thank you for excellent service. Thank you for excellent service. My name is Kevin McDonald. I need to tell someone what really happened in Uranium City before they come for me. The doctors say I'm having episodes, but I know what I saw down there. I know what's still out there in the woods. I was an environmental cleanup specialist for 12 years. Hazmat certification, radiation safety training, the works. I've crawled through chemical spills that would melt your skin off, scraped radioactive sludge from places that don't exist on any map. I thought I was tough. I thought I'd seen everything nature and human stupidity could throw at me. But in April 2022, Environment Canada sent me to clean up uranium contamination around a dead town called Uranium City, Saskatchewan. Population 62. More abandoned houses than living people. The kind of place where you can scream and nobody will hear you because nobody's left to listen. I should have known something was wrong when they wouldn't let me bring a partner. Standard protocol for radiation cleanup is 2-person teams. But they said budget cuts, skeleton crew, routine job. They lied. There's nothing routine about what the Canadian government buried under those mines. Patient becomes agitated, requests water break. The thing that still wakes me up screaming? It wasn't the creature. It was the sound of children laughing in those empty specimen jars. Empty jars that shouldn't have made any sound at all. Uranium City looks like the end of the world. Imagine 53 black holes punched into the earth, each one surrounded by rusted warning signs in English and French. The wind never stops howling through the abandoned houses. It sounds like voices calling for help. I set up my base camp in an old mining supervisor's house. The previous tenant had left suddenly, dinner still on the table, covered in 40 years of dust. Family photos on the walls showed a man, woman, and 2 small children. Someone had scratched out their faces with something sharp. The first month was routine contamination mapping. I'd drive my truck to each mine shaft, set up my Geiger counter, take soil samples. The radiation levels were manageable with proper gear, lead-lined suit, respirator, the full hazmat setup. Hot work in Saskatchewan summer, but nothing I couldn't handle. Then I started noticing things. Small things that made my skin crawl. At Mine Shaft 3, I found children's toys buried in the radioactive soil, melted plastic dolls with faces twisted into screams. At Mine Shaft 12, my metal detector picked up dozens of small metal objects 6 feet underground. When I dug them up, they were dental fillings. Human dental fillings. I called my supervisor, Janet Morrison, in Winnipeg. "Janet, I'm finding human remains mixed in with the contaminated soil. Someone needs to contact the RCMP. Kevin, those mines are over 60 years old. Any human remains would be from industrial accidents during the mining operations. Focus on the contamination assessment." But I knew industrial accidents. I'd cleaned up plenty of them. This was different. The dental fillings were small, child-sized. Patient requests bathroom break, returns visibly shaken. By the time I reached Mine Shaft 7, I was barely sleeping. Every night in that supervisor's house, I'd hear footsteps on the roof. Children's footsteps, running back and forth above my head. When I'd go outside to check, there was never anyone there. Just my truck and the endless Saskatchewan darkness. Mine Shaft 7 looked exactly like all the others from the surface. But when I lowered my radiation detector down the shaft, the readings went insane. Instead of steady contamination levels, my equipment showed massive spikes followed by dead zones with no radiation at all. Like something was moving down there, blocking and unblocking the radiation source. I rigged up a camera on a winch cable and started lowering it into Mine Shaft 7. At 40 meters, where the mining record said the shaft ended, my camera hit a concrete platform. But the depth finder showed the shaft continued down another 60 meters. The video feed showed metal stairs descending into deeper darkness. But it also showed something else that made my hands shake so badly I almost dropped the equipment. Fresh scratches in the concrete walls. Deep gouges that looked like claw marks, except they followed deliberate patterns. Someone, or something, had been scratching a message into the wall over and over. "Help US, help US, help US." I yanked the camera back up, but when it reached the surface, something had attached itself to the cable. A piece of yellowed paper that shouldn't have survived 60 years in an underground mine shaft. In faded typewriting, "Restricted access, biological research facility, authorized personnel only." The date made my blood freeze, the 15th of March, 1962. But underneath the official text, someone had scrawled in what looked like dried blood, "They're still alive down here." My radio crackled with static, then a voice I didn't recognize came through. "Kevin. Kevin McDonald. We've been waiting for you." I grabbed the radio. "Who is this? How did you get on this frequency?" Static. Then children's voices, singing, "Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down." The singing cut off abruptly. My radio went dead. Patient exhibits visible tremors, requests, sedative. That night, I called Janet from the landline in the supervisor's house. I told her about the facility beneath Mine Shaft 7, about the voices on the radio. She listened in silence, then said the words that should have made me run. "Kevin, Environment Canada is sending a supervisor with classified clearance. Don't go back to Mine Shaft 7 until she arrives." "What kind of classified clearance?" "The kind that means this conversation never happened." Dr. Patricia Chen arrived 3 days later, but she wasn't alone. 2 men in black suits followed her SUV in a second vehicle. They set up a perimeter around Mine Shaft 7 and wouldn't let me within 50 meters of the entrance. Dr. Chen was a small woman with dead eyes who spoke like she was reading from a script. "Mr. McDonald, what I'm about to tell you is classified under the Official Secrets Act. The facility beneath this location is a former biological research station operated by the Canadian government from 1960 to 1980. "What kind of biological research?" Her smile was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen, the kind that involved children. Dr. Chen led me into the underground facility wearing full hazmat gear. The stairs descended through 3 levels of concrete corridors lined with laboratory rooms. But these weren't animal testing labs. They were designed for human subjects. Each room contained a child-sized examination table with leather restraints. Dark stains covered the floors and walls. But the worst part was the children's drawings taped to the walls. Crayon pictures of monsters with too many arms, of needles and pain, of doctors with no faces. Dr. Chen, these are pediatric examination rooms. You said this was biological weapons research. It was, Mr. McDonald. We were testing the effects of radiation exposure on developing immune systems. The subjects were indigenous children removed from their families through the residential school system. The temperature in the corridor dropped 20 degrees. My breath came out in visible puffs. Through my hazmat suit, I could feel something watching us. How many children? I whispered. 47 subjects, over 20 years. Most died within the first few months of testing, but some adapted. We reached a sealed door marked Specimen Preservation. Dr. Chen entered a code, and the door hissed open to reveal a room filled with glass containers. Each container held something floating in chemical solution, but they weren't preserved animals. They were children, or what had been children. The radiation hadn't just killed them. It had changed them, twisted them into impossible shapes. Extra limbs, enlarged skulls, organs visible through translucent skin, and their eyes followed our movement through the preservation fluid. Patient experiences, severe panic attack, requires medical intervention. Jesus Christ, they're still conscious, I gasped, watching a 10-year-old girl with 4 arms turn her head to look directly at me. The radiation enhanced their cellular regeneration to the point where clinical death became impossible. Dr. Chen explained calmly. They've been aware for 60 years. That's when I noticed the empty container at the end of the room. The label read, Specimen 47. Active containment. Where is Specimen 47? Dr. Chen checked her tablet. Cryogenic storage, sublevel 3. The only subject that achieved full adaptation, enhanced intelligence, increased physical capabilities, perfect cellular regeneration. It was our greatest success. A sound echoed through the facility, metal scraping against concrete. Then a child's voice, distorted and wrong. Mama, where's Mama? Want to go home. Dr. Chen. That sound is coming from sublevel 3. Impossible. Specimen 47 has been in cryogenic suspension for 43 years. But as we descended to the lowest level, the scraping sounds grew louder. And underneath them, I could hear something else, children crying. Dozens of children, weeping in the darkness. The cryogenic level contained a single room with one massive chamber. Warning lights flashed red, and fluid leaked from broken seals. Through the cracked glass, I could see the chamber was empty. On the floor, written in some kind of dark fluid, was a message. Kevin MacDonald, we've been waiting for you. Dr. Chen's face went white. Specimen 47 knew you were coming. It's been planning this. The lights went out. In the absolute darkness, children's laughter echoed from every direction. But it wasn't playful laughter. It was the sound of something that had forgotten how to be human. Kevin. A voice whispered in my ear, even though nothing was there. Kevin, help us, make them pay. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in hellish red shadows. Dr. Chen was gone. I was alone in the cryogenic chamber, with wet footprints leading toward the exit, footprints that weren't there moments before. I followed the prints through corridors that seemed to stretch longer than they had before. The facility was changing around me, walls shifting, rooms appearing that hadn't been there during our descent. On every surface, children had scratched messages. Help us, make them stop, Kevin, Kevin, Kevin. I reached the specimen preservation room to find all the containers cracked open, preservation fluid covering the floor. But the children weren't floating in the broken glass anymore. Wet tracks led from each container toward the corridors. That's when I saw Specimen 47. It had been a native boy, maybe 12 years old when the experiments began. Now it stood 7 feet tall, its body stretched and twisted by decades of radiation exposure. Extra arms sprouted from its torso. Its skull had elongated to accommodate an enlarged brain. But its eyes were still those of a terrified child. Kevin MacDonald, it said in a voice like grinding bone. Environmental cleanup specialist. 12 years experience. Lives alone in apartment 3B, 127 Henderson Avenue, Winnipeg. Mother Margaret visits every Sunday. I ran. Behind me, I could hear them coming. All 47 test subjects, their radiated bodies scraping against walls, their voices calling my name. Some crawled on multiple limbs. Others moved in ways that human joints shouldn't allow. But they all knew who I was. They all wanted something from me. I reached the stairs, leading to the surface, but specimen 47 was waiting at the top. It had somehow gotten ahead of me, moved through the facility, using passages that didn't exist on any blueprint. We've been alone so long, Kevin. 60 years of pain and loneliness. But you're going to help us. You're going to bring us more friends. I don't understand. What do you want? Specimen 47 smiled with a mouth full of too many teeth. The government thinks we're dead, but we're very much alive. And we're so very hungry for company. Behind me, the other specimens reached the bottom of the stairs. I was trapped between them and their leader. But specimen 47 held up one elongated hand, stopping the others. Kevin's special children. Kevin's going to help us visit the surface world. Aren't you, Kevin? The creature pressed something into my hand, a small device that looked like a radio transmitter. When you're ready to bring us more playmates, just press the button. We'll come for them. We'll make them just like us. I won't do it. I'll never help you hurt people. Specimen 47 leaned close enough that I could smell the preservation chemicals still clinging to its skin. Oh, Kevin, you don't have a choice. We're in your head now. We know where you live. We know where your mother lives. We know where everyone you've ever cared about sleeps at night. The facility shook as explosions echoed from above. Dr. Chen's voice crackled through a speaker. Specimen 47, this is your final warning. Return to containment immediately, or we'll detonate the charges. Specimen 47 laughed. They think they can bury us again. But we've had 60 years to plan our escape. The facility collapsed as I reached the surface. But I wasn't alone. Specimen 47 and several others escaped through ventilation shafts they'd spent decades enlarging. Dr. Chen and her team were found dead at their monitoring station, torn apart by something with very sharp claws. I told the authorities that a structural collapse had killed everyone inside. They accepted my report. The mine shaft was filled with concrete, and all records were classified. But they didn't get all of them. Patient exhibits severe agitation, speaks rapidly. The transmitter is still in my apartment. Every night, I hear voices on it, children's voices begging me to press the button, to bring them new friends to play with. They know where I live. They know my mother's address. They scratch at my windows when it gets dark. Last week, my neighbor's daughter went missing. 8-year-old Sarah Chen, same last name as the doctor, probably a relative. The police found no trace of her, but I know where she went. I know what she's becoming. Because 3 nights ago, I heard a new voice on the transmitter. A little girl's voice saying, "Thank you for the playmate, Kevin. She's changing so beautifully. Soon we'll have enough children to visit the whole town." They're building an army. Taking children from small towns across northern Canada, places where missing kids don't make national news. Places like Uranium City, where nobody expects to hear screaming in the wilderness. Patient becomes incoherent. Interview terminated. Medical note. Patient. MacDonald was found in his apartment, surrounded by maps of northern Canada with dozens of small towns circled in red. Local police report 17 missing children from these communities over the past 18 months. Patient claims responsibility but provides no evidence. Psychiatric evaluation. Severe PTSD with possible dissociative identity disorder. Recurring nightmares involving radiated children. Responds violently when questioned about a small electronic device he keeps hidden in his apartment. Current status. Patient sedated and under 24-hour observation. Device confiscated but analysis pending. Patient repeatedly states, "They're coming for the children. They're coming for all the children." Investigating officers note. Patient's story checks out regarding his employment and the Uranium City cleanup contract. However, Environment Canada has no record of Dr. Patricia Chen, and all documentation of the biological research facility has been classified above my clearance level. Final note. 2 children went missing from the hospital pediatric ward last night. Security cameras show they simply walked out the front door, but witnesses describe them as moving wrong and looking excited to go somewhere. patient McDonald was found in his room, smiling and holding the confiscated transmitter that somehow wasn't in evidence lockup anymore. When asked how he got it back, he said, "I pressed the button. They needed more friends." My name is David Sinclair, and what I'm about to tell you happened in Hazleton, British Columbia, during the winter of 2020 to 2021. I'm recording this testimony because I don't know how much longer I'll be allowed to speak freely about what occurred at our elementary school. The RCMP have already been to my home twice. School board officials have made it clear that my teaching contract depends on my discretion. But children are still in danger, and someone needs to know the truth. I've been teaching for 12 years, started in Vancouver, then moved to smaller communities across BC, Williams Lake, Prince George, Fort St. James. I thought I'd seen everything rural education could throw at me. Budget cuts, substance abuse problems, kids coming to school hungry because their parents spent the grocery money on drugs. But Hazleton was supposed to be different, peaceful, safe. I was wrong. Hazleton Elementary sits on Elm Street, population 305. Our school serves 47 students from kindergarten through grade 5. I teach the older kids, 18 students ages 8 to 11. Behind our playground, dense boreal forest stretches unbroken for hundreds of kilometers, the kind of wilderness where people disappear and are never found. The school building dates to 1963, constructed of yellow brick that's now stained with decades of acid rain and diesel exhaust from logging trucks. My classroom windows face north toward those dark trees, and on overcast days, which is most days in northern BC, the forest looks like a solid wall of black. September 2020 brought COVID restrictions that actually worked in our favor. Smaller class sizes, more individual attention. The kids seemed happy to be back together, even with masks and social distancing protocols. I first noticed something wrong during outdoor recess on September 15th. It was a Tuesday morning, around 10:30. Light drizzle, typical for that time of year. The kids were playing normally when they suddenly froze. All of them, like someone had pressed pause on a video. They stood perfectly still, staring toward the forest edge where our chain-link fence met the tree line. Not looking at each other, not blinking, just staring. "What are you looking at?" I called out. Emma Beardy, one of my fourth graders, pointed toward the trees with a trembling finger. The other kids, Mr. Sinclair, they're watching us. I looked where she pointed, nothing but shadows and dripping pine branches. "What other kids?" "The dead ones," said Marcus Charlie, my oldest student. His voice was flat, emotionless. "They want us to come with them." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the October air. These kids were indigenous, Wet'suwet'en and Gitxsan mostly. Their families had oral traditions going back thousands of years. When they said they saw something, I'd learned to pay attention. I walked to the fence, squinting into the forest. The trees were thick enough that you couldn't see more than 20 or 30 feet before the shadows swallowed everything. Perfect cover for anyone who wanted to watch children without being seen. "There's nobody there," I said, but my voice sounded uncertain even to me. The kids slowly returned to their games, but they kept glancing toward the forest. They were scared. Not the typical childhood fear of monsters under the bed. This was deeper, primal, the kind of fear that keeps your ancestors alive. But it wasn't my imagination. I started timing it. Every recess, exactly 11 minutes in, the kids would stop and stare at the same spot. The clearing about 50 feet into the trees where the canopy opened up enough to let in a little gray light. After the third time, I called the RCMP detachment in Smithers. Told them we might have someone watching our school from the woods. Constable Morrison came out that afternoon, took a look around, found nothing. "Probably just kids being kids," he said. "You know how it is. They get ideas in their heads." But I knew it wasn't imagination when Emma started drawing pictures. Detailed pencil sketches of children in old-fashioned clothes, long dresses with high necklines, boys in short pants held up by suspenders, button-up boots, clothing from the 1920 seconds or earlier. The faces in her drawings were gaunt, hollow-eyed, desperate. "Where did you see these children, Emma?" I asked her after class. "In the trees," she said. "They stand there during recess. They try to talk, but no sound comes out. They look hungry." Other students started having the same visions. Always the same spot in the forest. Always children in period clothing. Always the sense that these children were trying to communicate something urgent. Then the nightmares started. October brought frantic phone calls from parents. 7 families reported the same disturbing dream affecting their children. Every night for 2 weeks, David wakes up screaming about children calling his name from the forest. Mrs. Chen told me during a parent conference. He says they want him to come outside and play with them. But when I ask him to describe them, he just cries. The nightmares were remarkably consistent. Children in old-style clothing standing in a forest clearing. They beckoned to my students, mouths moving desperately but no sound emerging. In the dreams, the ghost children looked starved, with sunken cheeks and protruding ribs. They held out skeletal hands, begging for help. But what disturbed me most was what the children said during their nightmares. Multiple parents reported their kids speaking in their sleep in languages the families didn't recognize. Guttural sounds, flowing phrases that seemed to come from deep in their throats. I started researching local history, looking for any explanation for what we were experiencing. What I found made my blood run cold. From 1,889 to 1,956. The Hazleton Indian Residential School operated on the exact site where our elementary school now stands. The residential school was part of Canada's systematic cultural genocide. Kill the Indian and the child was their official motto. Children were taken from their families, forbidden to speak their languages or practice their religions. The conditions were hellish. Overcrowded dormitories, contaminated food, inadequate heating. Physical and sexual abuse was routine. Disease spread rapidly through the malnourished student population. According to government records I found in the provincial archives, 387 children died at the Hazleton Indian Residential School over its 67 years of operation. Most were buried in unmarked graves on the school grounds. Their families were never told where their children were buried. Our current school was built in 1963, using the same foundation as the residential school. We were literally sitting on top of a mass grave. November 15th changed everything. It was afternoon recess, around 2 p.m. The sky was the color of dirty steel, and the forest looked darker than usual. I was doing my usual perimeter walk when I decided to get a closer look at the spot where the kids always stared. I walked right up to the chain-link fence. The trees were about 20 feet away. As I stood there, studying the shadows, trying to figure out what the children thought they were seeing, the temperature dropped at least 10 degrees in the span of a few seconds. My breath began forming clouds in the suddenly frigid air. The forest went completely silent. No bird sounds, no wind in the branches, nothing. That's when I saw them. Children's faces emerging from the shadows between the trees. Translucent at first, like looking through fog, but becoming more solid by the second. 5 or 6 of them, exactly as Emma had drawn them. Emaciated faces with hollow, desperate eyes. Clothing from the early 1900s. But these weren't peaceful spirits. Their mouths hung open in silent screams. Their eye sockets were dark holes, and where their teeth should be were rows of sharp, yellowed points. Their fingernails had grown into long, dirty claws. They were looking directly at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. When they realized I could see them, they began moving their mouths frantically, trying to communicate. Their expressions were frantic, angry. They weren't trying to befriend my students. They were hunting them. Then they started beckoning. Not gently, but with violent, jerky motions. Demanding. Their faces contorted with rage when I didn't move toward them. I spun around. My students were lined up along the fence, staring at the ghost children. But their expressions weren't fear. They were blank, glassy-eyed, like they were hypnotized. "They're so hungry," Emma said in a monotone voice. "They've been waiting so long to eat." "Eat what?" I asked, but I already knew the answer. "Us," Marcus said. "They want to eat us." I quickly herded the kids inside, my hands shaking as I unlocked the school door. But when I looked back at the forest, I saw dozens of them now. Ghost children pressed against trees, clinging to branches, emerging from the shadows, all staring at my students with predatory hunger. That night, I went home and drank half a bottle of rye while researching everything I could find about the residential school. What I discovered in a 1943 government inspector's report made me physically sick. Children at the Hazleton School weren't just dying from disease and abuse. They were starving to death. Deliberately. Food was withheld as punishment. Some children resorted to eating grass, tree bark, anything they could find. Several reports described children so malnourished they looked like walking skeletons. The ghost children I was seeing weren't just spirits of the dead. They were spirits of children who had starved to death. And now they wanted to feed. December brought escalating terror that I couldn't ignore or rationalize away. On December 3rd, Emma's mother found her daughter standing in their backyard at 2 a.m., barefoot in the snow, staring toward the school. When she shook Emma awake, the girl said, "They showed me where the hungry ones sleep, under the playground. They're so cold." 3 more children were found sleepwalking toward the school that week. All in their pajamas, all barefoot in sub-zero temperatures, all completely unaware they had left their beds. When awakened, they described the same thing, ghost children leading them to specific spots around the school where the old dormitory buildings used to stand. But it was what happened to Tommy Michelle that made me realize we were dealing with something far more dangerous than restless spirits. Tommy was my quietest student, a 3rd grader who rarely spoke above a whisper. On December 10th, he didn't show up for school. His mother called to say he was sick, but her voice sounded strange. Scared. I drove out to the Michelle place after school. They lived in a small house about 10 minutes from town, surrounded by dense forest. Tommy's mother, Sarah, answered the door, looking haggard and frightened. "He won't eat," she said without preamble. "It's been 3 days. He says he's not hungry, but he's getting so thin." She led me to Tommy's bedroom. The boy was sitting on his bed, staring out the window toward the forest. When he turned to look at me, I gasped. His face was gaunt, his cheeks sunken. His eyes had dark circles underneath them, and his lips looked bloodless. He looked exactly like the ghost children. "Tommy," I said, "how are you feeling, buddy?" "I'm not hungry anymore, Mr. Sinclair," he said in a voice that sounded too old for his 8-year-old body. "They taught me how not to be hungry. It's easy once you learn." "Who taught you?" "The children in the forest. They know all about hunger. They've been hungry for so long that they forgot how to eat. Now I'm like them." Tommy had lost 12 pounds in 3 days. His mother was desperate, trying to force him to eat, but he refused everything. He said food made him sick now. He only wanted to sit by the window and stare at the trees. Dr. Patel at the Hazelton Medical Clinic was baffled. Tommy's blood work came back normal, no signs of illness or malnutrition. But the boy continued wasting away. "It's like his body is forgetting how to process food," Dr. Patel told me privately. "I've never seen anything like it." Tommy wasn't the only one. By mid-December, 5 of my students were showing similar symptoms: rapid weight loss, refusal to eat, obsession with staring at the forest. Their parents were frantic. Meanwhile, the supernatural activity at school was escalating beyond anything I could handle alone. During indoor recess on snowy days, my students would point at empty desks and insist they were occupied by the ghost children. But now I could see them too. Emaciated children sitting at our modern desks, their hollow eyes fixed on my living students. They weren't attending class out of curiosity. They were studying my students, learning their habits, their weaknesses, planning something. The ghost children began appearing in our classroom windows during lessons, pressing their gaunt faces against the glass, leaving no marks or condensation. Their mouths moved constantly, but instead of words, I began to hear something else. Chewing sounds. Wet, grinding noises like teeth working on something tough and fibrous. My students started speaking in languages I didn't recognize, Wet'suwet'en and Gitsan words they'd never learned. But when I had Mary Tate, an elder from the local First Nation, listen to recordings, her face went white. "That's not how we speak," she whispered. "Those are the old words, from before the residential schools. But they're speaking them wrong, backwards. It's like they're trying to summon something that should stay buried." On December 18th, I found Marcus Charlie in the school basement after hours, crouched in the old utility room that sat directly over the residential school's foundation. He was digging in the dirt floor with his bare hands, his fingernails bloody and torn. "Marcus, what are you doing?" He looked up at me with eyes that weren't quite his own anymore. "They told me to dig here. There's something they want me to find." I pulled him away from the hole he'd been digging and saw what had terrified me most. In the loose dirt were small, white fragments. Bone fragments. Children's bones. The ghost children weren't just trying to communicate with my students. They were trying to drag them down into the earth to join them in their eternal hunger. That night, I called the RCMP again, but this time, Constable Morrison's response was different. "Mr. Sinclair, I need you to listen carefully. There are things about this town's history that certain people don't want discussed. You need to stop talking about ghosts and concentrate on teaching, for your own good." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm warning you. There are people with a lot of money invested in keeping the past buried. Tourism, development projects, government contracts. Stories about haunted schools are bad for business." He paused, then added, "Besides, those residential school records you've been digging through? A lot of them are classified under the Indian Act. Accessing them without authorization is a federal offense." I realized then that I wasn't just dealing with supernatural forces. There were human elements actively working to cover up what was happening. January 2021 brought the darkest developments yet. Tommy Michel died on January 8th. The official cause of death was failure to thrive. Essentially, he starved to death. "But Dr. Patel pulled me aside at the funeral and whispered something that still haunts me. I did an unofficial examination before the body was released," he said. Tommy's stomach was completely empty, but there were bite marks on the inside of his mouth, like he'd been trying to eat his own tongue. 2 days later, Emma Beardy was found unconscious in the school basement, lying in the same utility room where I'd found Marcus digging. She was hypothermic despite the building's heating system working perfectly. When she regained consciousness, she spoke only in the backwards, Wet'suwet'en, that Mary Tate found so disturbing. It took 3 days for Emma to remember English again. When she did, what she told me made my blood freeze. "They took me downstairs to meet the hungry ones," she said. "There are so many of them, Mr. Sinclair, hundreds. They're buried all under the school, and they're so hungry they've started eating each other. That's why they want us to come down. Fresh food." "What did you see down there, Emma?" "The basement goes way deeper than you think. There are tunnels and rooms from the old school. The hungry children live down there now. They showed me the bones they've been chewing on. Some of them are really old, but some are newer." "Newer?" "Kids from town who went missing. They said Tommy's with them now, and he's hungry too." I reported Emma's account to the RCMP, but Constable Morrison's response chilled me. "Mr. Sinclair, Emma Beardy has a history of psychological problems. Her family has struggled with substance abuse and mental illness for generations. Anything she says should be taken with extreme skepticism." But I knew Emma. She was one of my most reliable students, mature beyond her years. And she wasn't the only one with similar stories. 4 more students had been found unconscious in various parts of the school building over the past month. All in areas directly above the old residential school's foundation. All speaking backwards languages when they regained consciousness. All describing underground chambers filled with starving ghost children. By February, I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. The Hazleton Indian Residential School hadn't just been a place where children died from disease and abuse. It had been something far worse. A place where systematic starvation had been used as a form of torture. Children had been deliberately starved to death as punishment for speaking their native languages or practicing their cultural traditions. The ghost children weren't trying to communicate or find peace. They were trying to satisfy a hunger that had consumed them for over 60 years. They wanted to drag living children down into the earth to feed their endless, supernatural appetite. And someone in authority was actively preventing me from stopping it. On February 20th, everything came to a head in the most terrifying way possible. I was staying late to grade papers when I heard children's voices coming from the basement. Not my students. We'd been in lockdown due to a COVID exposure, so the building should have been empty. I grabbed a flashlight and headed downstairs to investigate. The basement was much larger than I'd realized, with corridors and storage rooms I'd never seen before. As I followed the sound of voices, the temperature dropped dramatically. My breath formed thick clouds in the frigid air. The voices led me to a section of the basement I didn't even know existed, a long hallway with doors on either side. The construction looked much older than the rest of the building. This was part of the original residential school. Through one of the open doorways, I saw them. Dozens of ghost children huddled in what had once been a dormitory. But these weren't the translucent figures I'd seen before. These were solid, real, terrifyingly present. Their emaciated bodies were covered in filth and decay. Their mouths were stained with dark substance that looked like dried blood. In the center of the room sat Tommy Michel. He looked up at me with eyes that were now completely black. His cheeks were sunken, his lips pulled back in a permanent grimace that revealed rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. When he smiled, I saw that his mouth was full of what looked like small bones. "Hello, Mr. Sinclair," he said in a voice like grinding gravel. "We've been waiting for you." The other ghost children began to stand, their movements jerky and unnatural. They started walking toward me with predatory intent, their clawed hands reaching out. "Tommy's so much happier now," said a girl in a torn, blood-stained dress. "He doesn't have to pretend to be alive anymore. He can just be hungry like us." "We're going to make all the children hungry," added a boy whose jaw hung at an unnatural angle. "Then they'll come live with us forever." I backed toward the doorway, but it slammed shut with a sound like breaking bones. The ghost children began closing in from all sides. Their mouths opened impossibly wide, revealing throats that descended into absolute darkness. "You can't stop us," Tommy said. "The people in charge won't let you. They make too much money from this place. They know what's down here, and they don't care. The school board gets federal funding for every indigenous student enrolled," explained the girl with the bloodstained dress. "They need our hunting ground to stay open." That's when I understood the true horror of the situation. This wasn't just a supernatural problem. There were human beings in positions of authority who knew exactly what was happening and were allowing it to continue for financial gain. The ghost children lunged at me with inhuman speed. I felt their claws rake across my face and arms as I fought my way toward the door. Their teeth snapped inches from my throat. The smell of decay and dried blood was overwhelming. Somehow, I managed to force the door open and run. I sprinted through the basement corridors with the sound of dozens of feet pounding after me. Claws scraped against the walls. Voices shrieked in languages I didn't understand. I burst through the basement door into the main school hallway and slammed it behind me. The sounds of pursuit stopped immediately, as if the ghost children couldn't follow me past that threshold. But I knew it was only temporary. They were getting stronger, more substantial. Soon, they wouldn't be confined to the basement. I tried to report what I'd seen to everyone I could think of. The school board, the RCMP, the regional health authority, even federal agencies. The response was always the same. Polite dismissal followed by subtle threats about my job security and mental health. But then I received a visit that explained everything. Robert Hawthorne appeared at my door on a Saturday morning in early March. Well-dressed, expensive car, the kind of confidence that comes with serious money and political connections. "Mr. Sinclair, I represent certain interests that have significant investments in this community," he said without preamble. "The stories you've been spreading are becoming problematic." "What stories?" "Ghost stories, supernatural nonsense, the kind of talk that hurts property values and scares away tourists." He sat down at my kitchen table without being invited and opened a briefcase full of documents. "Do you know how much federal money this community receives annually for indigenous education programs?" he asked. $6.2 million. That funds not just your school, but infrastructure projects, cultural programs, economic development initiatives. "What does that have to do with?" "Everything," he interrupted. "Those funds are contingent on maintaining enrollment numbers and demonstrating successful integration of indigenous students into the provincial education system. Stories about haunted schools and supernatural threats to children tend to make parents pull their kids out of school." He pulled out a thick contract and slid it across the table. "This is a consulting agreement. $50,000 annually in exchange for your complete discretion about any unusual phenomena you may have observed at Hazelton Elementary. You'll continue teaching, of course, but you'll focus on education rather than other matters. You're trying to buy my silence about children being endangered. I'm offering you a practical solution to an imaginary problem." His smile was cold. "The alternative is that your teaching license gets reviewed for mental health concerns. We have documented reports of you making bizarre claims about ghosts and underground tunnels. The College of Teachers takes that sort of thing very seriously." I stared at the contract, understanding finally how deep this corruption went. They weren't just covering up supernatural activity, they were profiting from it. As long as indigenous children kept enrolling at Hazelton Elementary, the federal money kept flowing. It didn't matter that some of those children were being spiritually consumed by the hungry ghosts buried beneath the school. "There's one more thing you should know," Hawthorne said as he packed up his briefcase. "Tommy Michael wasn't the first child to die under mysterious circumstances at this school. Over the past 15 years, we've had 6 failure-to-thrive cases. All Indigenous children, all enrolled in your school's federal funding programs. You knew what was happening and you did nothing. We knew that sometimes children die, Mr. Sinclair. It's tragic, but it's also profitable. Dead children can't withdraw their enrollment, and their families rarely ask uncomfortable questions about federal education funding." He left the contract on my table and walked out, leaving me to understand the full scope of the evil I was dealing with. The ghost children weren't just hunting my students. They were being deliberately fed to maintain a system of institutional profit built on the bones of Indigenous children. I destroyed Hawthorne's contract and made a decision that would cost me everything. Over the next 2 weeks, I secretly documented everything I could find about the supernatural activity at the school. I took photographs of the basement areas where ghost children appeared. I recorded audio of the backwards languages my students spoke. I compiled medical records showing the pattern of mysterious illnesses and deaths. Most importantly, I used ground-penetrating radar equipment borrowed from a construction company to map what lay beneath our playground. The results confirmed my worst fears. There weren't just a few dozen unmarked graves under the school. There were hundreds. Layer upon layer of small skeletons, some dating back to the 1892, others much more recent. The most recent appeared to be from the past 2 decades. The Hazelton Indian Residential School had never really closed. It had just changed its name and continued operating with federal funding and institutional protection. On March 15th, I called a mandatory meeting for all parents and community members. I presented my evidence publicly, despite knowing it would end my career and possibly my life. The reaction was immediate and violent. Within hours, I received death threats. My car tires were slashed. Someone threw a rock through my living room window with a note that read, "Stop or die." But some people listened. Mary Tate and other First Nations elders began their own investigation. They confirmed what I had discovered and added details that made the situation even more horrifying. The hungry ghosts aren't just the spirits of children who died at the residential school, Mary explained. They're the manifestation of institutional starvation itself. They represent the deliberate policy of cultural genocide that tried to starve Indigenous identity out of our children. "They feed on more than flesh," added another elder. "They consume cultural memory, language, traditional knowledge. Every child they take is another piece of our heritage, lost forever." The community raised money for an independent archaeological survey of the school grounds. When the results came back in April, they revealed 347 sets of human remains buried beneath the building. Most were children between the ages of 5 and 12. But the most disturbing discovery was that 6 of the skeletons showed evidence of having been buried within the past 20 years. Fresh bones mixed with historical remains, creating a timeline of continuous tragedy. The memorial ceremony we held on May 1st was unlike anything I had ever experienced. As Mary Tate and other elders performed traditional prayers and smudging ceremonies around the school grounds, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. The sky darkened to an unnatural black, and the wind began howling with sounds like children screaming. Then they appeared. Hundreds of ghost children emerged from the earth around the school. Not the hungry, predatory spirits I had encountered before, but children as they had been in life, whole, healthy, wearing traditional Indigenous clothing from dozens of different nations. They stood in silent witness as each name was read aloud, acknowledging their individual existence and tribal heritage. Some wept translucent tears, others smiled for the first time in over a century. But not all the spirits were peaceful. The hungry ghosts, the ones who had been feeding on my students, emerged from the basement of the school with expressions of rage and desperation. They shrieked as the cleansing smoke touched them, their emaciated forms writhing in apparent agony. "They don't want to be healed," Mary Tate explained. "They've been hungry for so long that hunger is all they remember. They've forgotten they were ever children." The battle between the peaceful spirits and the hungry ghosts was visible to everyone present. Light and shadow twisted together above the school grounds. The air filled with voices speaking in languages that predated European contact with North America. It ended when the last name was read. The hungry ghosts dissolved into nothingness with sounds like breaking glass. The peaceful spirits faded gradually, their faces serene and grateful. The supernatural activity stopped immediately. My students were no longer drawn to stare at the forest. The nightmares ended, the mysterious illnesses resolved themselves. But the human evil remained. Robert Hawthorne and his associates didn't give up easily. Within a week of the memorial ceremony, I was terminated from my teaching position for spreading culturally insensitive misinformation. My teaching license was suspended pending a mental health evaluation. The RCMP opened an investigation into my harassment of grieving families and desecration of cultural sites. I was charged with trespassing, mischief, and public nuisance. The legal fees bankrupted me, but I wasn't the only target. Mary Tite and other community members who had supported the investigation faced similar harassment. Federal funding for local programs was suddenly cut or redirected. The archaeological firm that had conducted our survey lost their provincial contracts. The message was clear: anyone who threatened the profitable system built on Indigenous suffering would be destroyed. Today, Hazelton Elementary continues to operate with full federal funding. The memorial garden we planted was removed during renovations the summer after I was fired. The basement areas where I encountered the hungry ghosts have been sealed with concrete and marked as structurally unsafe. New teachers arrive every year, carefully screened for their willingness to focus on practical education rather than cultural distractions. They're paid well and given clear guidelines about what subjects are appropriate for discussion. The children attend classes normally. They play during recess without staring at the forest. They sleep peacefully through the night. But sometimes, if you know what to look for, you can still see the signs. Indigenous students still enroll at rates that seem suspiciously high for such a small community. They come from reserves hundreds of kilometers away. Their families offered special incentives to transfer their children to Hazelton's culturally sensitive education program, and occasionally, a child still dies under mysterious circumstances. Failure to thrive. Sudden onset medical condition. Accidental death during outdoor education activities. The official reports always conclude that these deaths are tragic but unpreventable. The families usually accept financial settlements in exchange for confidentiality agreements. The federal funding continues without interruption. I believe the hungry ghosts are still there, waiting beneath the school. The memorial ceremony may have freed the peaceful spirits, but it didn't destroy the institutional hunger that created them. That hunger is fed by human greed, protected by government bureaucracy, and maintained by the willful blindness of people who profit from Indigenous suffering. The ghosts may be gone, but the system that created them is stronger than ever. I'm telling this story because I received a call 3 weeks ago from a teacher at Little Red River Elementary in Alberta. She's been seeing children stare at empty spaces during recess. Students have been speaking in languages they've never learned. Families are reporting identical nightmares. Her school was built on the site of a former residential school. The hungry ghosts aren't limited to Hazelton. They exist wherever Indigenous children were systematically starved of food, culture, language, and identity. And in too many places, that starvation continues under different names with different funding sources. If you're a teacher, a parent, or community member in a small Canadian town with a dark history, pay attention to the children. Listen to what they're trying to tell you. Don't let the authorities convince you that their fears are imaginary. The ghosts may be gone from Hazelton, but the hunger remains. And it's always looking for new places to feed. The residential schools never really closed. They just learned to hide their true purpose behind bureaucratic language and federal education funding. And somewhere in the Canadian wilderness, children are still going hungry.